it's interesting because when I look around and I see all these people who are demanding that others tiptoe around them, that they take their emotional triggers into account constantly, that any type of, thing that might make them uncomfortable, essentially they just can't handle it. Those are bad indicators. Those are indicators that you are not able to cope, and you don't have healthy coping mechanisms, and you don't have a strategy, and you're not kind of just self-limiting, like, I just can't handle this topic right now. I'm going to go listen to something else. I can't handle, certain situations. So I'm going to do my best to work towards being able to handle them while giving myself a little bit of room and grace and all of that. And, I've been through this. I've been through this a couple times in my life where I did demand that people kind of tiptoe around me, but that doesn't create any type of good situation for anyone. And you can't bubble wrap the world, And I think that when I go on TikTok and I see a lot of these people talking about these mental illnesses, especially, and kind of putting that in their bios as like some type of label or some type of personality trait almost, it's very alarming, because it just indicates that people are not wanting to actually overcome these things. They think that they are subjected to them forever. And there are things that you can't just cure, or, I don't actually think it's beneficial to just throw medication at people on a whim. I think that should just be like a last resort option for a limited time, if that's possible. There's some stuff that's just so severe, obviously, but there's a lot of things like depression. Everybody goes through a period of depression. And being somebody who has been through it so many times in my life and has experienced that to a very high degree, there's no, the idea that, oh, you just, can think yourself out of it. Well, you can. It's not easy. You have to change your patterns. You have to change your lifestyle. You have to challenge yourself. You have to push yourself constantly. You have to come to grips with the things that are causing it. You have to find coping mechanisms. And I think that's just something that people just don't want to hear. And instead they're just living within that, and they're miserable. And I don't want people to be miserable. I want people to see that there are so many things that you can change that will contribute to a healthier lifestyle. And it's also something that I'm still learning and I'm still developing. And I think that when you come from a really rough upbringing, it's very important to kind of take a look back, see how that all occurred, and then make a plan for moving forward. And I think people are forgetting the moving forward aspect.
That is so good. I agree with that. When you look at therapy and the successes of it, by far, overwhelmingly, the most successful type of therapy is the cognitive behavioral therapy, more so than talk therapy or antidepressants or SSRIs or EMDR or any of those treatments. It's exposure to that which is triggering. For instance, somebody who has OCD, overwhelmingly the best way to break that, if you have to wash your hands all the time, is to slowly but gently introduce the person to the germs, or for instance, get them to the point where they can actually put their hands on a toilet seat and stay there without freaking out. And over time, it seems like our brain gets rewired. And so this idea of safe spaces and warnings of trigger and all that, it's like, human beings are resilient. Look at what you shared with us about the childhood that you had, and that you, even then, as a young girl, as a child, as an innocent one, you had the ability in your brain to cope and not be totally overwhelmed, even though it affected you. We are very resilient as human beings. And so this idea of sitting in our mental health and our trigger warnings and safe spaces is not good for our human development. It's good to be aware of it, but I think exposure and having our thoughts challenged, and I think like this woke mindset, how many woke people decided, oh, I'm going to cut off all conservatives out of my life, or anybody who doesn't encourage what my worldview is and my thought about myself. I want nothing to do with these people. Well, that's not real. That's not humanity. That's not the way our lives work. And so we need viewpoint diversity. I think it's good for us to be more well-rounded. We need logic. We need to be exposed to different things. And this overemphasis on almost like a pride and security in the fact that I have a mental health problem. It's kind of like that seems to be prevalent in the woke mindset. It's my identity is tied into my therapy and my mental health. And I feel like that's pretty destructive and pretty unhealthy. Don't know if you had any comments along those lines, but those are just some of the things that I'm thinking of as we're sharing here. No, just any of your thoughts about this idea of not only the victim mentality, but the concept that the woke mindset often prides itself on their own mental health and being sick mentally. And it's almost like a status. The more comorbidities mentally, it's like a good thing almost. And I feel like that's pretty dysfunctional.
It's very dysfunctional. And I think it really keeps people down. It keeps people from achieving better things. It keeps people from improving their lives. And, there's a lot of things that I see where I'm like, man, this feels nefarious. This feels like this ideology wants people to believe that they are so incapable of making positive changes and that they're just subject to live within this forever. And then people do. And people, I've known a lot of people throughout my life that struggle with mental health issues, and I have struggled with it on and off for a very long time. And just when it comes to depression and anxiety and PTSD. And I see people now who seem to be almost mimicking that. They don't necessarily have it, or the way they describe it is just not quite on track, it seems. And it's very frustrating, because it's like when you're going through these things and it's real, it's very difficult to get out of that. And I've been very proud of myself for just trying to think my way out of these things, to change my ways of viewing the world and my life, especially because, I had a lot of anger for a really long time. And it has only been since I did go to therapy. I went to therapy for years, and that therapist didn't just sit and listen and go, yes, 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 you're very valid. She would encourage me and say, look, don't minimize what you've been through, accept it, acknowledge it, but we have to figure out a better way for you to think about things and for you to kind of view that. And it's important that you feel your feelings, obviously, but at the same time, you can't let that limit yourself. And so she would challenge me, and she would point out when, I was blaming something on a past thing, or perhaps, when I was describing an incident, it's like, okay, well, were you so innocent in this incident, or did you contribute to a bad outcome of some kind? And I think that's really important. And now I just see people who think that therapy is just going and talking to somebody, telling them all your feelings, and them basically not really helping you at all. It's just somebody to vent to, essentially. It's like, that's not what therapy is supposed to be, in my opinion. It's not how I've ever, experienced it. And it took me a while to find somebody who I could talk to and feel comfortable with and felt like was genuinely helping me. Not everyone is a good one. So
yeah, who wants to sit in mental health problems, depression and OCD and, PTSD. It's like, come to terms with it and move on the best you can. I'm not saying diminish it or ignore it or mind over matter. I'm saying own it. Now what? Okay, now what? Life is hard. Where am I going? And how is this problem in my life going to transform my life? And how am I going to overcome? And I think there's too much of this on the left, especially among the woke, of sit in it and be a victim. And so anyway, that's just one of the things. I've listened to a guy who's has schizophrenia, and he was woke and he's left, and he still struggles with it. And he said, I'm telling you, I have schizophrenia, and my mom is struggling with mental health problems. And I wanted to be woke, but I realized, people are just glorifying this, and schizophrenia is not fun. It's not something to be glorified. And mental health, when I see my mom curled up in the bathroom, is not fun, And so, I mean, these are things that are real. They plague our society. But how do we help people? I want to give you the last word, and I would like you to speak directly to people that are young, that are considering the ideology of leftism and, in particular, critical social justice and wokeism, to maybe just put a stop in their mind before they give themselves to this ideology, or those that are stuck in it, that really see the world through the lens of power and oppressor and oppressed, and they interpret everything through that lens. Those two people in particular, what would you say to them in a way that helps them to avoid some of the pitfalls that you fell into, and then that so many in our country, especially in the university system, and a lot of young people have fallen into? What would be your word of exhortation?
That's a big one. I think the biggest thing is acknowledging that you could be wrong. I think that's something that people are afraid of, almost, that this idea that, you know, we've kind of created almost like a internet culture, especially where if you're wrong, people tend to get like humiliated instead of humbled. And I think it's really important to keep that humility intact. And also, you know, I see a lot of people that kind of twist statistical and data and stuff like that in a way that supports their point of view while ignoring the parts of it that doesn't. So I would just kind of, I guess, a word of caution towards, you know, studies. All of them have limitations. All of them are flawed in one way or another, whether it's like sample size or the way that the study was conducted, or, you know, quantitative versus qualitative. And I think it's really important to remember that correlation doesn't equal causation. You know, just because you see some type of inconsistency or inequality doesn't necessarily mean that it's there through nefarious means, or it's a sign of any type of like discrimination or something like that. There's just natural inequalities in the world that occur. And if you can find the root cause of that, that's much more important than just stating it exists. And something like an example I'm thinking of is like the gender pay gap is a really big one to bring up. But the reason for that is not due to like inherent sexism or discrimination against women. It's natural differences between men and women. So I think a lot of that stuff just gets kind of twisted and contorted. And if you can just expose yourself to other points of view and consider them genuinely, don't just automatically assume this is coming from a place of hatred from that other person. Genuinely listen, genuinely try to figure out where they're coming from, because I guarantee you that we both care about people. We just see solutions to the same problem in much different ways.